Hi yarny friends, I'm Sara Sach. Welcome or welcome back to another edition of this or that, and sometimes the other thing. I'm so glad you're with me today. And if you don't know what our this and that videos are, usually I ask you a question having to do with crochet or yarn or techniques or fibers or something like that that we do in our crochet craft. Okay, and then I give you opportunity to comment about the question. Feel free to give your opinion. Please do comment because I do love to read all of your comments, whether you agree with me or not. Remember, there are no wrong answers. We all have our ideas and thoughts about what we like to do and techniques that we do. So what is today's this or that question? Well, it has to do with buttons. I've gotten lots of questions about how do you sew buttons on crochet items? How do you keep it from sliding through? And I've gotten questions on how to sew on appliques. How do you get it straight? What do you do? And so today I'm going to do a little demonstration. And I've done this before, and I do it every time I sew on a button onto a pattern. But I'm going to show you today the technique that I use to sew buttons on crochet to keep them from sliding through. And also a quick technique on how to sew an applique on so that it stays put. And so today's question is, do you use buttons? Do you use them to attach things? Do you use them as just decorative? Do you like to use buttons on crochet? A lot of people really don't care for it. And a lot of people love it because it adds lots of extra pizzazz to things sometimes. But other times I don't. Just depends on the project that I'm working on. I love adding them to hats. I love adding them to displays and things like that. And they just really, if you get the right button, of course I love wooden buttons. They're my favorite on hats and things. But anyway, the bottom line of the question is, do you like them? Do you like using buttons and even appliques? I know it can be overwhelming sometimes to sew things on. And so let's do a demo. So normally I would tell you to use a yarn that either matches your fabric that we've made, our crochet, or matches the button. But for today's demonstration, because I want you to see what I'm doing, I'm going to be using this bright yellow. That way you can see what I'm doing. So the first thing I want to show you is how to quickly thread the yarn onto your needle. Now the key is not to get a needle with too small of a hole. All right, fold that yarn over your needle and kind of pull it down and flatten it out. Then you've got a nice flat edge to shove it through the eye of the needle. Okay, I'm gonna set this one aside. I've already got this one threaded. All right, so first let's just sew on a basic button. This one just has two eye holes. And so we're just gonna put it up over here, all right? Now you can see there are holes in my crochet. We have holes between our stitches, and we don't wanna put a button there because if we do, it's not going to hold and it could just slide right through one of those holes, okay? And we don't want that. All right, and this is just a swatch that I was doing a few months back about embroidery on crochet, and you're welcome to go and look in my this or that videos for how to embroidery on crochet. All right, so what I usually do is I decide where I'm going to put that button, and I make sure that I go in a stitch and come back out a stitch, and then I'll make a loop. And you want to leave a nice long tail. And I'm just going to make a loop. And I'm going through stitches, not the holes. All right. So I've made a loop. I haven't even put my button on yet. I've just made a loop. All right. And then I'll take my button. And now I'm going to sew my button on. And I'm going to make sure that I stitch close to those stitches, but not through them. But I am going through a stitch and not through a hole. And depending on what you're going to do with this button, if it's going to go through a button loop, like on a bag or something, and it's going to be used a lot, you want to use more loops through the holes or through, okay? Because you want that to be on there nice and secure. Now we have this. Let's just say I did a whole bunch of loops. All right, so I'm just going to grab a crochet hook and I'm going to pull that loop underneath here. There we go. We're going to pull that strand to the back of our yarn, or the back of our work, I mean. All right, so it's in the back. And then all I do is when I'm on the back, I make sure that I go through a couple of stitches back here. I'll go ahead and cut that. And then I'll just make a knot. I always try to do 3 knots. Now, if you're worried that this knot is going to come undone, you can dab it with a little dab of hot glue. You can use a fray check or something like this. This is just a fabric glue, Aleene's fabric glue. You can put a little dot of glue on there and just let it dry, and that's going to hold it and keep the knot from coming undone. Okay, so when we look at the front of it now, it's on there securely. It's going through stitches of our crochet, not holes, and it's not going to slide through the holes. So what if I have a button that's called a top hat, which means on the bottom it has a loop and not the top? And it's done very much similarly, that sounds weird. It's done pretty much the same, okay? So I'm going to go through a couple of stitches, not holes, leave a tail, make my loop, and this is cotton yarn I'm sewing into, so it's a little bit stiffer. All right, so then we just go through the loop and we do it the same way, only we're going to be working on the top only, going through, and I'll put it through and I'll do that until it's on there securely, and making sure that I go through stitches on the back and not holes. Again, the key is to sew it on securely and not let it slip through the holes of the fabric of our crochet. All right, so I'm going to grab that, pull it to the back. Now we're on the back of our work again. I'm going to make that loop. There we go. One, two, three. Clip it. I can add a dab of hot glue or fabric glue to that to keep it, fray check. And then I've got a button with a top hat. Now it is going to stand up taller because it has that loop on the back. And these are great when you're going to do like a loop for a bag or a loop to close the top of a shawl or something, and you want to loop it around. Okay, so that's how you sew buttons on. It's a lot easier than you think, but it can be very frustrating when you've spent time to put buttons on and they just slide right through your crochet work. All right, so the last thing I want to show you real quick is how to sew on an applique. So a lot of times if you want your applique just to stand up, you can always just sew the center and it's going to have a little bit of a 3D effect. But if you want it to stay put and have everything lay flat, it's a little bit different. And again, the key is to stitch through stitches and not holes. All right, so I'm going to come in through the back through a stitch, and you'll notice there is that, I call it a braid. It's not the braid. It's where all the loops of the stitches are. And what I do is I try to follow those. And also I would use the same color of yarn. And I go up. And then I'll come back. And this will hide those stitches because they'll be the same color as the applique. I would do this with a pink yarn or even the same yarn if I had it. And as you stitch, you go forward and then back. and you're just following around those loops that you made when we stitched up this particular applique. And you would follow this around, all the way around, and then that would stay put. Now I know that sometimes we don't have that edge to stitch in, and I really recommend when you're doing an applique, if you're doing one and it doesn't have that, you can do a quick stitch of slip stitch around the edges, and then you have those slip stitches to do this same sort of technique. All right? All right, now the key to making this nice and neat is to use matching yarn. And the key to making your buttons nice and neat is making sure you go through the stitches of the crochet, whatever they are, whether they're, slip stitches, single, doubles, triples, quadruples, doubles, whatever you're using. Just make sure when you're sewing your button on, you go through the stitches and not the holes. Because again, if you go through the holes, you're going to lose that button through the hole. So I hope I've answered some questions here for you. Buttons seem like a really simple thing, but I get questions on this every week. How can I keep my buttons from slipping through or staying secure? And this will help you do that. Well, I hope that answered your questions on how to sew on a button, how to keep it from going through the holes, as well as how to neatly sew on a applique. And I know these seem like really simple techniques. You think, oh, everyone should know that. But if you're learning to crochet, even a simple technique like this can cause frustration. And I don't want anybody to be frustrated when they're crocheting and making their crochet projects. Anyway, I hope that answered your question. And remember, if you have any other questions, there are no wrong or bad questions. There aren't. I will do my best to find you an answer. And like I said, if I don't know it, I'll look for it and I'll try to find you an answer to your questions. If I've already done a video for that particular question that you're asking, I'll go ahead and link a video for you when you ask the question. But feel free to ask questions. I am always ready to answer a question. But remember, it has to do on this video with crochet, yarn, techniques, and things like that. I don't know why your cat does this, and I don't know why your dog does that, or why the sky is blue or the grass is green. But if you have a question, I'll do my best to try to find you an answer. Well, thank you for being with me today, and I do hope that answered some questions for you. And I'll see you next time.